Welcome to an extraordinary episode of Destination Peace's groundbreaking Conversations Survivors series. Today we are bringing you another story of resilience, but with this guest, swashbuckling adventure as well. Our guest tonight is a man who has spent a lifetime embracing the unknown, a man who has journeyed to some of the most treacherous terrains on Earth and returned with treasures of incredible value, both literal and figurative. Gary Bowersox is not only one of the world's foremost experts on Afghanistan, but also a former U.S. Army major who served in Vietnam before dedicating over 50 years, a half a century, to the perilous pursuit of gems and minerals in Central Asia. Often likened to a real-life Indiana Jones, Gary's story is not one of fiction. His adventures have taken him on horseback to the peaks of Afghan mountains, scaling 14,000-foot altitudes, and into caves where danger was as abundant as the precious stones he sought. Alongside local miners, he unearthed a treasure trove of rubies, emeralds, and sapphires, sometimes relying on little more than crowbars and sheer determination. But Gary's legacy extends far beyond his discoveries. As the chairman of the Honolulu Explorers Club, and as a man deeply attuned to the ongoing challenges facing the Afghan people, he brings a unique perspective forged by decades of firsthand experience. Today, Gary will take us into the heart of this remarkable journey, his stories of survival, exploration, and unwavering commitment to understanding and preserving Afghanistan's natural and cultural heritage. This is a conversation you won't want to miss. Stay tuned as we dive into the life and adventures of a modern-day legend. Let's begin.
Thank you, Manny. Well, most of you know that Afghanistan is a very complex and old situation. For centuries, it's been primarily tribal. The people themselves have more loyalty to family than tribe than they ever have to any government. And that's the reason most of their governments do not last very long. I've had many years, as Manny mentioned, about over 50, traveling the mountains of Afghanistan, hiking and camping all summer, staying with the local people, which are some of the nicest and some of the happiest people on this earth, which most people won't believe. But they just want the rest of the world to leave them alone and let them believe in what they believe in. And they have since worked many things out. They're very peaceful once you get away from the politicians and get up into the mountainsides, and are so willing to share. A good sample of that is, with my 50 years there, I have never had a problem getting a place to stay in an evening, even though we'd start as late as 7 o'clock at night and just knock on a door. I was never once turned down in all those years. We were always accepted, taken in, and it wasn't a matter of money. They really didn't care if we paid them or not. Sometimes, however, before we'd knock on the door, we'd go to the bazaar and buy a goat or something, so we'd also bring some food with us. But we felt by the next morning when we were packing up that we could have stayed in that village forever. So the heart of the Afghans is excellent. Their kindness is excellent. And even Marco Polo wrote in his old books the same thing that I'm telling you today. This doesn't have anything to do with the politics. That goes back to the politicians and the rulers of Afghanistan, who have a different reputation, sadly enough.
First of all, thank you very much for explaining that to our audience. I'd also like to ask you a question in terms of the Explorers Club. In addition to having read your book, The Gem Hunter of Afghanistan, which I highly recommend to our audience, I also highly recommend watching the cable television show of the Explorers Club. Could you tell us a little bit about your association with the Explorers Club and how that came about?
I was speaking to that club in 1991, and my friends there asked me if I wouldn't be willing to join. The Explorers Club is made up of scientists, mountain climbers, deep sea people, astronauts, and fascinating people who have done scientific research around the world and have published. That's number one on the list if you want to become an FN member, which is fellow national. They also are taking in other members for a matter of money.
Could you perhaps tell us one of the guests that you've had, one of the guest speakers at the Explorers Club, and a little bit about just one member?
I think the most fascinating member that I remember was Story Musgrave. He's the astronaut, but wasn't truly an astronaut because he wasn't a jet pilot like the others. That he was one that was brought in to correct the Hubble problems to do with the Hubble. And he was first taken to NASA and put in a pool with a grand piano to push it around to get a feel for what it was going to be like in a spacewalk. But I think the most exciting thing that we asked him was, how did you feel? Were you scared to take off and ride that rocket all the way up to the space station? And he said, no. He said, I felt I was fully trained until I got into the seat of the rocket and it was starting to blast. And all of a sudden, I happened to think this rocket is built by 10,000 of America's lowest bidders.
That's certainly fascinating, and I highly recommend that all of you viewers watch the cable show on the Explorers Club. It's truly fascinating. Now, Gary, I'd like to ask you a question. In terms of music, again, we don't really go over this question with our guests because we're always looking for a surprise, spontaneous answer. But in terms of the indigenous music of Afghanistan, are there any anecdotal stories or anything that you could share with us with regard to your having heard music in Afghanistan, or any instances when you came upon people singing or anything relating to music?
Yes, Benny, this usually happened right after dinner. They would be sitting around. There's no television there, no radio there, no newspaper there. And so someone would start singing, and it ended up maybe a whole group. And then there's always a few that are going to grab a pot and pan because they didn't have musical instruments and start pounding on the pot and pan to join in on the music and the singing. And they have many of their own songs. I honestly didn't understand most of them.
I'm sure you didn't. So one of the things at Destination Peace is we try to use music and a universal anthem to bring peace throughout the world. One of the last things that I ask our guests, I asked our guest from Romania to speak in Romanian, and I asked our guest from Hong Kong who had left China to speak in Chinese. I'm not going to ask you to speak directly to the Afghanistan people in their vernacular, but if you had a message that could be conveyed to the people living in Afghanistan right now and people that you met along the way, what would be your message to them?
Relax a little bit and put your faith in God and peace for the future, because I truly believe that it's going to come, and that the current situation is very unstable and not in a situation where it could last for a long time.